Many people think of the past as the Dark Ages. They imagine a time filled only with gloom and hardship, but this picture is not entirely complete or fair. People who lived long ago still experienced joy and sorrow, love and loss. They worked hard, they built communities, and they had their own cultures. Imagine a world without the things we use every day, like electricity or the internet. Life then was much simpler in some ways, but it was also far more challenging. Every single day presented difficulties, a constant test of a person's ability to survive. Yet, despite these tough conditions, communities managed to exist and even develop their own unique ways of life. The name Dark Ages itself can give us the wrong idea. It suggests a period where learning stopped and no progress was made. This is not really true. While life was very different, learning did continue, especially in places like monasteries. Clever craftsmen and artisans created beautiful objects, from detailed carvings to sturdy tools. People found new ways to cope with their surroundings and invented solutions to their problems. Life was certainly very tough, there is no doubt about that. However, it was not a time completely without its own forms of light and achievement. To truly understand this era, we need to look beyond the common myths and see the reality of their daily lives. Think about your own life for a moment. Now try to imagine it without all the modern comforts you're used to. There is no running water coming from a tap in your home. There is no central heating to keep you warm during cold nights. Your world is lit only by the flickering flames of a fire or the natural light of the sun and moon. The sounds around you would be very different too, without the constant noise of cars and machines. The pace of life would feel much slower, guided by the changing seasons and the length of daylight, not by clocks and schedules. This was the everyday reality for people living many hundreds of years ago, a life deeply connected to the rhythms of the natural world. This journey back into the past is not about judging the people or their times. Instead, it is an effort to understand how they lived. We want to explore the details of their daily routines. What kinds of homes did they build for themselves and their families? What kinds of food did they eat to stay alive and strong? How was their society put together, and what were the roles of different people within it? By looking very closely at these aspects, we can start to appreciate the immense struggles they faced. We can also begin to see their remarkable strengths and how they managed not just to survive, but sometimes even to find ways to flourish under very difficult circumstances. Homes for most ordinary people during this period were very basic indeed. If you were a peasant, you would likely live in a small, simple hut. These dwellings were often constructed from materials readily available nearby, such as wood or a mixture of woven sticks and mud called wattle and daub. The roofs were commonly thatched, made from layers of straw or reeds which needed frequent repair. Inside, the floors were usually just the hard-packed earth. There was very little privacy for the family. Many of these homes consisted of only 1 or 2 rooms. Sometimes during the cold winter months, families might even bring their animals inside to share the small space for extra warmth. Inside these humble homes, the atmosphere was often dark and filled with smoke. A central hearth, a simple fire pit on the floor, provided the main source of heat. This fire was used for cooking meals and for giving some warmth to the dwelling. There were no chimneys like the ones we have in modern houses. Instead, the smoke from the fire would slowly find its way out through a hole in the roof or through small gaps in the walls. Furniture was very sparse and roughly made. You might find a rough wooden table, a few simple benches to sit on, and perhaps straw-filled sacks on the floor for beds. People owned very few possessions, and their lives were lived very close to the basic essentials of survival. Hygiene standards were vastly different from what we know today. Taking a full bath was a rare event for most common folk. Water was a precious resource that had to be laboriously carried from a local well, a stream, or a river. Soap, if available at all, was a luxury that few could afford. People often wore the same set of clothes for many days or even weeks at a time. This general lack of cleanliness, unfortunately, contributed significantly to the spread of various diseases. As a result, life expectancy was much shorter than it is in our modern world. Sickness was a constant and serious threat, and the remedies available were often based on traditional herbs and sometimes on superstition rather than medical science. Obtaining enough food was a constant worry for almost everyone. The typical diet was simple: and depended heavily on what could be grown or found during different seasons of the year. Bread was the main staple food for most people. They usually ate coarse dark bread made from grains like barley, oats or rye. Finer bread made from wheat was generally only available to the wealthy. If they had a small plot of land, people would grow vegetables in their gardens. Common vegetables included onions, cabbages, leeks, peas and beans. Foraging in the woods and fields for wild plants, nuts and berries was also an important way to supplement their diet and add variety to their meals. Society during these times was organized in a very clear way, much like a pyramid. This system of organization is often called the feudal system. At the very top of this pyramid was the king, or sometimes a very powerful lord who ruled over a large area. These rulers owned vast amounts of land. Below them in the social structure were other nobles and important warriors called knights. These knights were skilled fighters. They promised to fight for their lord and protect his lands. In return for this military service and loyalty, the lord would grant them portions of land known as fiefs. This whole system was built upon mutual obligations of loyalty and service between different levels of society. The vast majority of people, however, were peasants. They were also sometimes known as serfs, and they formed the very bottom layer of this social pyramid. Peasants were the ones who worked the land. They spent their lives farming, growing the crops that fed everyone. Crucially, they did not own the land they farmed. It belonged to the lord of the manor. As part of their obligations, they had to give a significant portion of the food they grew to their lord. In addition to this, they were also required to work on the lord's own private fields for a certain number of days each week, without receiving any payment for this labor. Life for a peasant was incredibly hard and filled with constant tiring work. Knights had a very different role and lifestyle compared to the peasants. They were the professional fighting men of the era. Their primary job was to protect the lord's lands, his castle, and the people who lived on his domain from enemies. Becoming a knight required long years of training in combat skills, including horsemanship and the use of various weapons like swords and lances. They wore protective armor when they went into battle and often rode powerful war horses. Being a knight was a position that carried a certain amount of status and respect within society. However, it also meant facing the very real dangers and brutality of warfare. Their sworn loyalty to their lord was of utmost importance. Lords and ladies who were part of the nobility lived in much better conditions than the common people. They typically resided in large manor houses or even fortified castles. These structures were built not only for comfort but also for defense against potential attacks. They had access to a greater variety and quantity of food, wore finer clothes made from more expensive materials, and held significant power over the people living on their lands. The lord was responsible for managing his estates and the people who worked for him. He often acted as a judge in local disputes and was expected to provide leadership. He, in turn, also had obligations to the king or a higher-ranking lord above him in the complex feudal chain of command. The church was an incredibly powerful institution during these centuries. It played a central role in almost everyone's life, from birth until death. In Western Europe, nearly every person was a Christian. The church provided spiritual guidance and taught people about God, heaven, and hell. It also owned vast amounts of land and possessed considerable wealth, making it a major economic force. Priests and monks were very important figures in every local community. They were responsible for conducting religious services, performing baptisms for newborn babies, marrying couples, and conducting funerals for the deceased. The church's influence reached into all aspects of daily existence and provided a shared set of beliefs. In a world that was often harsh and unpredictable, the church offered a powerful source of hope and comfort. People held strong beliefs in the teachings of Christianity. They believed that their life on earth was a kind of test or preparation for an afterlife that would be eternal. The church also provided some essential social services that were not available elsewhere. Monasteries in particular were important centers of learning and scholarship. Monks painstakingly copied books by hand, preserving ancient knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Some monastic orders also offered practical help to the poor, the sick, and travelers, making the church a vital institution in society. The feudal system, with its hierarchy of lords and vassals, and the church, with its spiritual authority, together shaped the entire structure of society. The Lord demanded hard work, agricultural produce, and unwavering loyalty from his peasants. The church, in turn, demanded faith, obedience to its doctrines, and financial support through tithes. People faced numerous key challenges in their daily lives. Constant, back-breaking labor was the norm for most. Famine was a very real and terrifying threat if crops failed due to bad weather or disease. Sickness could spread rapidly and wipe out entire villages. Warfare between rival lords was also common, bringing with it destruction, fear, and further hardship for ordinary people. Despite these truly immense difficulties and dangers, the people of this era showed incredible resilience and strength. They found ways to survive and to carry on with their lives. They built strong communities and cherished their families. They found moments of joy and celebration in religious festivals and seasonal holidays. They passed down their stories, their songs, and their traditions from one generation to the next. Life in what is sometimes called the Dark Ages was undoubtedly tough, filled with challenges that are hard for us to fully imagine today. But it was also a time of profound human endurance, adaptation, and quiet courage. Their enduring spirit and hard work laid the foundations for the ages that were to follow.